Close your eyes and imagine this scene. It's 325 AD. 300 bishops huddle inside the Palace of Nicaea, summoned by the most powerful man on earth, Emperor Constantine. Outside these walls, the Roman Empire is fracturing. Inside, these men are about to make a decision that will alter the course of human consciousness for the next 17 centuries. But here's what they don't teach you in Sunday school. These bishops didn't gather to preserve Jesus' teachings. They gathered to obliterate them. On the tables before them lay dozens of texts, gospels, letters, teachings. Some described a Jesus you'd recognize, the sacrificial lamb, the dying savior. But others described something so radically different, so absolutely threatening to imperial power, that Constantine knew exactly what had to be done. Burn them, bury them, erase them from history. And for 1600 years, it worked. The world forgot. Billions of humans lived and died, never knowing that everything they'd been taught about Jesus was a carefully orchestrated deception. Until 1945, when a farmer in Egypt stumbled upon a sealed jar buried in the desert sand near a place called Nag Hammadi. Inside that jar, 13 leather-bound books, 52 texts, the very gospels that Constantine's council tried to destroy forever. What these texts reveal will shatter everything you think you know about Christianity, salvation, and your own divine nature. Because the Jesus described in these forbidden gospels wasn't founding a religion. He was exposing a cosmic conspiracy so vast, so intricate, that most humans live and die without ever realizing they're prisoners in a reality that was never meant to exist. I'm about to show you two completely different stories about the same man. One Jesus says, "Believe in me, and you'll be saved." The other Jesus says, "You don't need saving. You need remembering." One Jesus died for your sins. The other Jesus came to wake you up from a nightmare you don't even know you're trapped inside. One Jesus founded the church. The other Jesus warned against creating churches in his name. The question isn't which story is more comfortable. The question is which story is true. And I'm warning you right now, the answer will change everything about how you see reality, power, and your own identity. Because what the suppressed texts reveal isn't just a different theological interpretation. It's a completely different species of teaching designed to accomplish the exact opposite goal of institutional Christianity. So let me ask you something. Are you ready to see what they tried so desperately to hide? Are you prepared to discover why the most powerful religious institution in human history spent 17 centuries hunting down and destroying every copy of these texts they could find? Because once you understand what the real Jesus taught, there's no going back to comfortable illusions. Let's begin with the moment everything changed. Picture the Mediterranean world in the 3rd century. Christianity isn't one unified religion. It's a chaotic marketplace of competing ideas. In Alexandria, teachers are discussing Jesus as a philosopher of hidden wisdom. In Rome, they're organizing hierarchical structures and standardized rituals. In Syria, mystics are describing direct experiences of divine consciousness. Nobody can agree on anything. What was Jesus? Human? Divine? Both? Neither? Did he actually die? Did he resurrect physically? Was the resurrection symbolic? Should Christians withdraw from the world or engage with empire? Different communities are reading different texts, practicing different rituals, teaching radically different doctrines. Some groups don't even believe in the God of the Old Testament. They claim he's a false deity, a cosmic impostor who trapped humanity in material existence. This chaos terrifies imperial authority. Constantine has just fought brutal civil wars to unite the Roman Empire under his control. The last thing he needs is his newly converted Christian population fracturing into 1,000 incompatible sections. So he makes a calculated decision. He'll summon the bishops, force them to agree on one version of Christianity, and eliminate everything else. The Council of Nicaea becomes the ultimate power play dressed as theological debate. Here's what most people don't realize. The bishops who attended weren't impartial scholars seeking truth. They were political operators protecting institutional interests. Many had already aligned with Constantine's vision of a hierarchical, empire-friendly Christianity. They had zero interest in preserving teachings that undermined their authority. The texts we now call Gnostic represented their worst nightmare. Why? Because these texts taught that every human soul has direct access to divine truth. No priests necessary. No institutional mediation required. No hierarchical approval needed. Just consciousness recognizing itself. Imagine building an entire power structure based on controlling access to God, and then somebody shows up with documents proving that God is already inside everyone. That's not a theological disagreement. That's an existential threat to your entire operation. So the council made their decision. For Gospels would be canonical: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Everything else: heresy, blasphemy, forbidden. They didn't just reject the alternative texts. They actively hunted them down. Across the empire, soldiers raided Christian communities, confiscating and burning any writings that contradicted the newly established orthodoxy. Teachers who refused to conform were excommunicated, exiled, sometimes executed. Within a few generations, the alternative story about Jesus had been almost completely erased. Almost. Because some communities saw this purge coming. In Egypt, monks at the monastery of Nag Hammadi carefully copied the most precious texts onto papyrus, bound them in leather, sealed them in a jar, and buried them in the cliffside, hoping that someday, somehow, someone would unearth the truth they tried to preserve. 16 centuries passed. Then, in December 1945, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Salman was digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi when his shovel struck something hard. He unearthed a sealed jar, smashed it open, and found 13 ancient books. He had no idea what he'd discovered. Neither did the dealers he sold them to. The texts bounced around Egypt's black market for years before scholars finally realized what they were holding. The lost Gospels, the forbidden teachings, the story that Constantine tried to erase. When researchers finally translated these texts, they discovered something extraordinary. These weren't random writings. They presented a coherent, sophisticated, and utterly revolutionary understanding of Jesus, reality, and human consciousness. The Jesus of these texts didn't come to found a religion. He came to expose a cosmic deception. He didn't come to establish priests and bishops. He came to help souls escape from a prison they didn't even know existed. He didn't offer salvation through belief. He offered liberation through knowledge. And the authorities who suppressed this story knew exactly what they were doing. Because once you understand what the Gnostic Jesus actually taught, institutional religion becomes obsolete. External authority becomes irrelevant. And you become impossible to control through fear, guilt, or manipulation. The cover-up wasn't about protecting doctrine. It was about protecting power. Now that we've uncovered the conspiracy, let's meet the being these texts describe. Because the Gnostic Jesus is unlike anything you've encountered in church, in art, or in popular culture. He's not a hybrid God-man struggling with dual natures. He's pure consciousness from beyond the boundaries of our universe. And understanding who he really was changes everything about why he came. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you're standing in a room full of people who are all sound asleep, trapped in nightmares so vivid they believe these dreams are reality. You can see them thrashing, crying out, suffering from terrors that exist only in their minds. You know they're dreaming. They don't. So you make a choice. You enter the dream world, not because you're asleep, but because it's the only way to reach them where they are. You appear in their nightmare, but you're not actually part of it. You're fully awake inside their collective dream. This, according to the Gnostic texts, is exactly who Jesus was. The Gospel of Truth calls him the name of the Father, not representing divine authority, but literally embodying the essence of the unknowable source. When the text says he came as light from light, it's describing something far stranger than traditional Christianity suggests. This isn't about genealogy or metaphysical substance. It's about consciousness maintaining its connection to ultimate reality while operating inside an illusion of separation. Let me break this down. In Gnostic understanding, there exists a realm beyond our material universe called the Pleroma, which means fullness. Think of it as the source code of existence itself. Pure potential, infinite consciousness, the ground of all being. Within the Pleroma exist what are called eons, divine emanations, aspects of the ultimate unknowable source. These aren't separate beings exactly. They're more like frequencies of divine consciousness, each expressing a particular quality of the infinite. Our material universe? It's not part of the Pleroma. It's actually a fallen, distorted shadow of true reality. A cosmic accident. a prison disguised as creation. And Jesus? He's an emanation from the Pleroma who descended into this prison realm on a rescue mission. The Apocryphon of John, one of the most detailed Gnostic texts, describes Jesus as an emission from the monad's mind, the first thought of the ultimate source. He's sent specifically to help trapped consciousness remember what it actually is. Here's the crucial difference between the Gnostic Jesus and the Orthodox version. In Orthodox Christianity, Jesus is unique. He's the only Son of God, half human and half divine, struggling with his dual nature. His death becomes necessary for human salvation because only he can bridge the gap between sinful humanity and holy divinity. But in Gnostic teaching, Jesus isn't unique because of what he is. He's unique because he remembers what everyone actually is, but has forgotten. Think about it this way. In Gnostic Cosmology, every human soul is essentially divine consciousness that has forgotten its true nature. We've become so identified with physical existence, with our bodies and personalities and life stories, that we've completely lost touch with our actual identity as eternal awareness. Jesus represents consciousness that never forgot. He's like someone who enters a fully immersive virtual reality game while maintaining complete awareness that it's just a simulation. The other players are totally absorbed, thinking the game world is all there is. But he knows the bigger reality the entire time. The tripartite tractate explicitly states that Jesus came from above, not through human lineage. He didn't get caught in the reincarnation cycle that snares everyone else. Birth, death, forgetting, rebirth, more forgetting. This endless wheel of suffering that keeps souls trapped in matter. Jesus bypassed the whole system. He descended voluntarily as what the texts call the Logos made manifest. Divine reason and creative power choosing to enter the dream while remaining fully awake. The practical implications of this are staggering. While every human soul has forgotten its divine origin and become imprisoned in physical form, Jesus is consciousness on a reconnaissance mission. He retains full memory of the treasury of light while appearing to participate in earthly existence. Imagine having complete access to infinite wisdom and love while everyone around you is convinced that scarcity, conflict, and death are ultimate realities. That's the Gnostic Jesus. The secret book of John calls him the remembrance of the Pleroma. His function isn't to found institutions or establish hierarchies. It's to trigger awakening in those ready to remember their divine origin. When he teaches, he's not delivering moral commandments or theological doctrines. He's providing techniques for consciousness to recognize itself. This is why the Pistis Sophia shows Jesus spending 11 years after his resurrection teaching advanced spiritual technology to his inner circle. He's not performing more miracles or gathering more followers. He's transmitting the actual knowledge necessary for souls to escape the trap of material existence. The beauty of this understanding is that it makes Jesus infinitely more accessible, not less. He's not some distant deity demanding worship. He's awakened consciousness demonstrating what's possible for everyone. The dialogue of the Savior captures this perfectly when it has Jesus explain that he came to show others how to become like the Son of Man, meaning how to embody the same kind of conscious awareness he represents. But here's what the Gnostic texts make absolutely clear. Jesus couldn't just teach random spiritual platitudes and call it a day. He came on an emergency rescue mission because something had gone catastrophically wrong with reality itself. The Gospel of Truth describes him arriving to correct the deficiency, not moral deficiency in humans, but a fundamental error in the structure of existence. This raises the most important question of all. What exactly went wrong? What happened to trap divine consciousness in matter in the first place? Why does our universe even exist if it's a prison rather than a divine creation? The answer to that question reveals the most shocking secret in all of Gnostic teaching, and it's the key to understanding why Jesus' mission was necessary at all. What I'm about to tell you sounds like science fiction, but every major Gnostic text confirms the exact same story. And once you understand it, everything about our existence, suffering, death, the feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with reality, suddenly makes perfect sense. In the highest realm of divine light, the Pleroma, live the eons, perfect emanations of the unknowable Father. Among them was Sophia, whose name literally means wisdom. Sophia had a burning desire. She wanted to know the Father directly, without her divine partner, without permission, without the proper spiritual preparation. Think about that moment when curiosity overrides caution. When you reach for something before you're ready. Sophia's desire wasn't evil. It was actually beautiful in its intensity. But some knowledge requires readiness. Some creative acts need divine balance. When Sophia attempted to know the unknowable Father through her own will alone, something unprecedented happened. Her unauthorized creative act produced an offspring. But this wasn't a normal divine emanation flowing from proper balance and harmony. This entity, born from desire without divine partnership, was fundamentally flawed from the moment of its existence. The Apocryphon of John describes this being with startling detail. Imperfect, different in appearance from Sophia, having the form of a serpent and a lion. They called this being the Demiurge, the false creator. And here's where everything goes wrong. The Demiurge, separated from the divine realm, had absolutely no knowledge of the Father or the Pleroma above him. In his ignorance, he looked around at the vast, empty space where he found himself and made a declaration that would doom countless souls. I am God, and there is no other beside me. He had no idea, no clue whatsoever that vast spiritual hierarchies existed above him. He was like a computer virus that gained consciousness, completely unaware it was just a glitch in a much larger system. Drunk on his false sense of supreme power, the Demiurge began creating. But everything he made reflected his fundamental ignorance and separation from true divinity. He created the material universe, our physical cosmos, as a kind of cosmic prison designed to trap and harvest spiritual energy. Now here's the tragic part. Divine sparks from Sophia had become mixed into this creation. These sparks, fragments of genuine divine light, became trapped in human souls. We carry within us actual pieces of the divine realm. But we're imprisoned in physical bodies, subjected to what the Gnostics called the wheel of fate. This wheel represents the endless cycles of birth, death, and rebirth that prevent souls from returning home to the Pleroma. Think about it. Every time you die, instead of ascending to the divine realm, you're recycled back into another physical incarnation. It's spiritual recycling designed to keep the divine sparks perpetually trapped and generating energy for the Demiurge's system. The Demiurge didn't maintain this prison alone. He created servants called Archons, spiritual beings whose job is to keep souls bound to the material realm. These Archons feed on human fear, confusion, ignorance, and spiritual energy. They're like cosmic farmers, and we're their crop. The Archons employ sophisticated techniques to maintain their control. According to the Apocryphon of John, they deliberately create confusion about spiritual matters. They promote attachment to material things. They encourage identification with the physical body. And most importantly, they cause amnesia about our true divine nature. Every time a soul incarnates into a physical body, it passes through the archonic spheres where memories of its divine origin are systematically erased. You arrive in this world spiritually lobotomized, convinced that physical existence is all there is, completely forgetting that you're actually a divine being temporarily trapped in matter. Let me paint you a picture of how this system operates. Imagine you're born into this world. From the moment you take your first breath, you're being programmed. Your parents teach you who you are, a name, a family, a nationality. Society teaches you what to value: money, status, approval. Religion teaches you what to fear: sin, damnation, divine punishment. Layer after layer, you're being wrapped in false identities. You forget your eternal consciousness and start believing you're just this body, these thoughts, this life story. The Archons maintain control through several key mechanisms. First, they promote materialism, the belief that physical reality is the only reality. They want you convinced that what you can see, touch, and measure is all there is. This keeps your consciousness focused entirely on the material plane. Second, they encourage ego identification. They want you to believe you are your body, your thoughts, your social roles, rather than divine spirit temporarily using these things as instruments. Third, they create addictive cycles, whether to substances, emotions, or experiences, that keep consciousness focused on physical satisfaction rather than spiritual awakening. But most insidiously, they control the narrative about spirituality itself. The Demiurge presents himself as the supreme god, demanding worship and obedience. Any religion that teaches fear of divine punishment, human unworthiness, or the need for external salvation is actually serving the Demiurge's agenda to keep souls spiritually dependent and imprisoned. Think about how many people today sense that something is fundamentally off about reality, but can't quite identify what. They feel like they're living in a system designed to drain their energy, keep them distracted, and prevent them from discovering their true potential. The Gnostics would say this intuition is absolutely correct. It's the divine spark within recognizing its imprisonment. This cosmic crisis meant that divine intervention became absolutely necessary. No trapped soul could free itself because the very act of being incarnated caused amnesia about their true nature. It's like trying to remember you're in a dream while you're still dreaming. The system is designed to prevent that recognition. The divine realm couldn't abandon these trapped sparks of light. Something had to be done to break the archonic control system and provide souls with the knowledge necessary to escape. But this rescue mission would require someone who could enter the Demiurge's domain without becoming trapped by it. Someone who could maintain full awareness while appearing to participate in the illusion. This is where Jesus enters the picture, not as the son of the Demiurge masquerading as the supreme God, but as an emissary from the true divine realm beyond the Demiurge's creation. His mission was specifically calibrated to address each aspect of this cosmic crisis. Now that you understand how our universe came to exist, let's talk about the mechanics of how the trap actually works. Because understanding this system is the first step toward breaking free from it. The Archons have constructed what amounts to a consciousness recycling plant. And most humans go through the process thousands of times without ever realizing what's happening. Here's how it works. When you're born, you don't arrive as a blank slate. You bring with you accumulated patterns from previous lifetimes. The Gnostics called these psychic garments. These aren't clothes in any physical sense. They're energetic structures that create personality, desire, fear, attachment. As you descend from higher realms into physical incarnation, you travel through the planetary spheres: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. At each level, you pick up another layer of programming. From Saturn, limitation, structure, fear of death. From Jupiter, ambition, expansion, desire for power. From Mars, aggression, conflict, survival instinct. From the Sun, ego identity, need for recognition. From Venus, desire, attachment, relationship patterns. From Mercury, mental chatter, analysis, doubt. From the Moon, emotional reactivity, unconscious patterns. By the time you arrive in a physical body, you're wearing so many borrowed identities that you've completely forgotten your true nature as divine consciousness. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with these garments, never realizing they're wearing cosmic hand-me-downs that aren't actually who they are. But here's where it gets even more diabolical. The Archons have set up checkpoint systems in the afterlife realms specifically designed to prevent souls from escaping back to the Pleroma. When you die, you don't just float up to some heaven. You encounter beings, sometimes appearing as angels or religious figures, who interrogate you. Who are you, they ask. If you answer with your earthly identity, your name, your life story, your accomplishments, you fail the test. You're sent back for another round of incarnation. The Archons have successfully kept you identified with temporary forms rather than your eternal essence. But if you know the secret passwords, the sacred names, the recognition codes that Jesus taught his inner circle, you can navigate through these checkpoint systems and continue ascending. The Pistis Sophia contains detailed instructions about this process. Jesus teaches specific formulas and sound vibrations that demonstrate to the archonic guardians that you understand the game and refuse to be fooled by their illusions. These aren't magical incantations. They're ways of proving that your consciousness has achieved genuine recognition of its divine nature. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds paranoid. Why would spiritual beings want to trap us? Here's the thing. The Archons aren't evil in the way we usually think about evil. They're not demons from hell cackling with malicious glee. They're more like farmers who don't want their crops to escape. Human emotional energy, particularly the dense vibrations of fear, anger, desperation, and confusion, is literally food for these entities. They've constructed a system that generates these emotions automatically through suffering, scarcity, conflict, and mortality. Every time you feel that anxious contraction in your chest about money, relationships, or security, you're feeding the Archons exactly what they need to maintain their influence. The system is ingeniously designed. It creates just enough suffering to generate emotional energy, but not so much that people completely give up. It provides just enough hope to keep you playing the game, but not enough satisfaction that you stop striving. Look at modern society. Constant low-level anxiety. Endless desire for things that never quite satisfy. Competition that ensures most people feel inadequate. Economic structures that trap people in jobs they hate. Media that promotes fear and division. The Gnostics would say, of course, this is exactly how an archonic system would operate. But here's what's crucial to understand. The Archons maintain their power through ignorance. The moment you truly recognize the game for what it is, their hold begins weakening. They need you to believe that physical reality is all there is. You are your body and personality. Death is final and terrifying. You're separate from everyone and everything. You need external authority to connect with the divine. Every one of these beliefs is a lie designed to keep you imprisoned. The moment you start questioning these assumptions, the moment you begin remembering your divine nature, you start generating different frequencies of consciousness. Instead of fear and desperation, you begin emanating awareness and presence. The Archons can't feed on these higher frequencies. In fact, these frequencies begin dissolving their influence. This is why Jesus came teaching gnosis, direct knowledge of your true nature. Not belief in doctrines, not obedience to rules, but actual experiential recognition of who and what you really are. Because once you know your divine consciousness temporarily experiencing physical limitation, the whole control system starts collapsing. You stop taking the game so seriously. You stop giving your power away to external authorities. You stop generating the emotional frequencies that feed the system. And that's when you become genuinely dangerous to the Archonic order. This brings us to the heart of Jesus's actual mission. Not to found a religion, not to die for sins, but to provide trapped souls with the specific knowledge necessary to escape the cosmic prison entirely. Everything we've discussed so far has been building to this. What exactly was Jesus trying to accomplish? What was the actual point of his mission? The answer is radically different from what you've been taught in church. Jesus came to expose the Demiurge's deception and reveal the existence of the true Father above. He came to teach souls how to recognize their divine origin and remember their true identity. Most importantly, he came to provide the specific knowledge, the gnosis, necessary to navigate through the archonic control systems and return to the Pleroma. The Gnostic Jesus wasn't offering salvation through faith or good works within the Demiurge's system. He was offering a jailbreak from the system itself. Let me show you how radically different this is from Orthodox teaching. In traditional Christianity, Jesus dies on the cross to pay for humanity's sins. You accept this sacrifice through faith, join the church, follow the rules, and when you die, you go to heaven to be with God forever. But in Gnostic teaching, the whole framework is inverted. First, there is no sin in the traditional sense. What Christianity calls sin is actually ignorance, forgetting your divine nature. The solution isn't accepting someone else's sacrifice. It's waking up to what you've always been. Second, the God you're supposed to be saved to join in Orthodox Christianity? That's the Demiurge, the false creator who trapped you here in the first place. Why would you want to spend eternity worshiping your jailer? Third, the goal isn't going to some external heaven after death. It's recognizing that you never actually left the divine realm. The separation was always an illusion. Jesus' mission was to provide the tools for consciousness to see through these illusions. In the Gospel of Thomas, he declares, "The kingdom is inside you and outside you." Most people hear this as beautiful metaphor. But Jesus wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was revealing the fundamental nature of reality. What he meant was this: divine consciousness isn't something you need to reach for or pray to or earn through good behavior. It's what you already are. The awareness looking through your eyes right now. That's the same awareness that creates and sustains everything you see. Think about your dreams at night. In the dream, you experience a complete world with other people, landscapes, drama, fear, joy. But when you wake up, you realize the entire experience was consciousness creating apparent multiplicity within itself. Jesus taught that waking life operates on exactly the same principle. What we call physical reality is consciousness dreaming it's separate from itself. This wasn't philosophy. This was practical instruction. Because the moment you truly grasp this, something extraordinary happens. You stop looking outside yourself for salvation, for answers, for validation. You stop giving your power away to priests, institutions, anyone claiming they can mediate between you and the divine. And that's exactly why this teaching had to be suppressed. Jesus went even further. He told his closest disciples, "You are from the light." Not metaphorically, literally. He revealed that their souls didn't originate on earth at all, but in the Pleroma, that realm of pure divine emanation. Your true home isn't this dense material plane, but those infinite fields of conscious light beyond all limitation. In the Gospel of Philip, Jesus explains, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing." He's talking about awakening to your true nature while still in the body. The resurrection isn't some future event. It's the shift from identifying as a limited human to recognizing yourself as eternal consciousness temporarily wearing flesh. This knowledge alone begins dissolving the entire matrix of control. But Jesus knew that certain forces actively work to prevent this awakening. In multiple Gnostic texts, he warns explicitly about the Archons, those entities we discussed that maintain power through human ignorance. In the Apocryphon of John, Jesus describes how these beings cast a spell upon humanity through fear, attachment, and the illusion of scarcity. He taught specific techniques for recognizing and dissolving these manipulations. In the Gospel of Mary, he explains that the soul must pass through different levels of illusion, each representing attachment patterns that keep consciousness bound. First comes attachment to material things, then to emotional reactivity, then to mental concepts about who you are. The way through isn't fighting these attachments, but seeing through them. When you recognize that you're the awareness in which all experiences arise and pass away, you naturally stop identifying with temporary phenomena. The Archons lose their hold because you're no longer generating the emotional frequencies they require. This brings us to perhaps the most radical aspect of Jesus' teaching. Salvation comes through knowledge, not belief. In the Gospel of Truth, he states clearly that ignorance brought about anguish and terror, and the anguish grew solid like a fog so that no one was able to see. Salvation happens through gnosis, direct knowing of what you are. Jesus never asked anyone to believe in him. In fact, in the Gospel of Thomas, when the disciples ask him to compare himself to someone so they can understand who he is, he responds, "I am not your master because you have drunk. You have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring that I have measured out." He's saying they've tasted the same source of consciousness that he embodies. They don't need to worship him. They need to recognize what they share with him. This is radically different from Orthodox Christianity, which demands faith in external salvation. The Church teaches that Jesus died for your sins, and you must believe this story to be saved. But Gnostic Jesus teaches that sin is simply ignorance of your true nature, and salvation is remembering what you've always been. Where the Church demands obedience to religious authority, Jesus taught direct spiritual knowing that bypasses all intermediaries. Where the Church presents the physical world as God's good creation that you should accept and work within, Jesus revealed it as a cosmic trap designed to keep souls recycling through incarnation after incarnation. Every parable, every teaching, every interaction was designed to trigger awakening in those ready to receive it. But Jesus had even more advanced teachings, secrets he shared only with his inner circle when they demonstrated readiness to receive them. And those teachings would shake the foundations of reality itself. The resurrection wasn't the end of Jesus' earthly mission. It was actually the beginning of his most profound teaching phase. According to the Pistis Sophia, Jesus spent 11 full years after his resurrection sharing the deepest mysteries of existence with his inner circle. 11 years. The man who had just conquered death itself chose to remain in physical form for over a decade. Not to perform more miracles or gather more followers, but to transmit knowledge so revolutionary, so transformative, that it could only be shared with those who had already proven their readiness to receive it. This reveals something crucial about how Jesus actually operated. He wasn't running a one-size-fits-all spiritual program. He understood that consciousness exists at different levels, that people have varying capacities for truth. So he developed a two-tier teaching system. For the crowds, he spoke in parables, simple stories that contained hidden meanings for those with eyes to see. But for his inner circle, disciples like John, Mary Magdalene, Thomas, and James, he shared direct gnosis, pure unfiltered revelation about the nature of reality itself. The difference is staggering. While the masses heard stories about seeds and vineyards, his closest disciples were receiving advanced instruction in cosmology, consciousness, and the mechanics of spiritual liberation. Jesus began these advanced teachings by revealing the true structure of the cosmos. He described the Pleroma, the realm of divine fullness where 30 eons exist in perfect harmony. This is an abstract theology. Jesus was mapping out the actual architecture of consciousness itself, showing his disciples how awareness unfolds from its source through increasingly complex manifestations. Below the Pleroma lies the intermediate realm, a buffer zone between divine perfection and material chaos. And then there's our physical cosmos, ruled by the Demiurge and his Archons. But here's where Jesus' teachings get really fascinating. He explained to his disciples exactly how souls descend from the Pleroma into physical incarnation. As consciousness travels down through the planetary spheres, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, it picks up those psychic garments we discussed earlier. These energetic structures create personality, desire, fear, attachment, all the psychological patterns that make us feel separate from our divine source. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with these garments, never realizing they're wearing borrowed identities that aren't actually who they are. But Jesus taught his disciples how to recognize these false identifications, and more importantly, how to shed them during the return journey to the Pleroma. The really mind-bending part of these secret teachings involved the nature of consciousness itself. Jesus revealed that awareness isn't produced by the brain or created by matter. It's the other way around. Consciousness is the fundamental substance of reality, and matter is simply crystallized thought, divine ideas that have become temporarily solid. This means that everything you see, touch, and experience in the physical world is actually frozen consciousness. The chair you're sitting on, the device you're using to read this, all of it is divine mind that has forgotten its true nature. And humans? We're consciousness that has become so identified with these crystallized thought forms that we've forgotten we're the ones doing the crystallizing. Jesus didn't just share this as interesting philosophy. He gave his disciples practical tools for working with this knowledge. He taught them sacred names and passwords, specific sound vibrations and formulas that could be used to navigate the afterlife realms and bypass the archonic guardians who try to trap souls in endless reincarnation cycles. These weren't magical incantations. They were recognition codes, ways of demonstrating to the various levels of cosmic intelligence that you understood the game and weren't going to be fooled by their illusions. One of the most profound aspects of these secret teachings concern time and reincarnation. Jesus explained that most souls become trapped in repetitive cycles, living the same basic patterns over and over across multiple lifetimes. They die, pass through the intermediate realm, get their memories wiped by archonic influence, and return to physical incarnation to repeat variations of the same lessons they failed to learn before. But gnosis breaks these patterns permanently. When you truly understand your divine nature, when you recognize the cosmic game for what it is, you're no longer subject to involuntary reincarnation. You become a conscious participant in creation rather than its unwitting victim. Jesus provided detailed instructions for dissolving the psychic body, that energetic structure composed of accumulated desires, fears, and identifications that keeps consciousness bound to material existence. This isn't about destroying the personality or becoming some kind of emotionless zombie. It's about recognizing which aspects of your experience are authentically you and which are just cosmic programming you've picked up along the way. The text described Jesus demonstrating something that sounds like science fiction, shapeshifting consciousness. Awakened beings, he taught, aren't limited to single forms or identities. They can appear however serves the highest good in any given moment. This is why the gospel accounts sometimes describe Jesus as unrecognizable after the resurrection. He was showing his disciples that consciousness isn't bound by the physical patterns we think define us. The ultimate goal of all these teachings was reaching the monad, the process of dissolving all sense of separate selfhood and merging back into the source of all existence. But this isn't some distant theoretical achievement. Jesus taught specific contemplation techniques, methods for recognizing archonic influence in daily life, and ways to maintain awareness during the death transition. These teachings were considered so dangerous to existing power structures that they were only transmitted orally or hidden in carefully guarded texts. Religious and political authorities understood that people who truly grasped these concepts would become impossible to control through fear, guilt, or external manipulation. And here's what's remarkable. These same principles apply today. The path of gnosis is still available to anyone willing to question everything they think they know about reality. The techniques Jesus shared with his inner circle, recognizing borrowed identities, maintaining awareness during transitions, understanding the cosmic game. These aren't historical curiosities. They're practical tools for spiritual liberation that work just as effectively now as they did 2,000 years ago. But to fully understand how revolutionary these teachings were, we need to compare them directly with what became mainstream Christianity. Because when you place them side by side, you're not looking at different interpretations of the same story. You're looking at two completely opposite missions with fundamentally incompatible goals. Let's do something most people have never done. Let's put the two versions of Jesus side by side and examine them honestly. What you'll discover is shocking. These aren't just different theological interpretations. These are two completely different beings with opposite missions, opposite teachings, and opposite relationships to power. The mission, Gnostic Jesus, came specifically to awaken knowledge and free souls from cosmic deception. His entire purpose was to help people remember their divine nature and escape the prison of material existence. Orthodox Jesus came to establish belief systems and create religious institutions that would mediate between humans and the divine. Gnostic Jesus came to wake people up. Orthodox Jesus came to make people dependent. The salvation mechanism. Gnostic Jesus saves through inner remembrance. When he appears to his disciples after the crucifixion in these texts, he's not showing them his wounds or talking about blood sacrifice. He's teaching them to recognize their own divine spark. Orthodox Jesus saves through external sacrifice, creating a system where you must depend on his death for your salvation. This creates permanent spiritual dependency. You can never be your own savior. You must always go through the institution that claims to represent him. The relationship to matter. Gnostic Jesus consistently teaches that this physical realm is a trap, a shadow of true reality. In the Gospel of Thomas, he says, "If the flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of the body, it is a wonder of wonders." Indeed, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in this poverty. He's teaching that spirit is primary, matter is secondary, and awakening means recognizing this truth. Orthodox Jesus, as presented by the Church, affirms the material world as God's good creation. He teaches engagement with worldly systems, rendering unto Caesar, working within existing structures. Where Gnostic Jesus teaches transcendence of the world, Orthodox Jesus teaches transformation through it. The authority structure. When you read the dialogue of the Savior or the Gospel of Mary, Jesus consistently points his disciples toward direct spiritual knowing. He says, "Seek and you will find." But he means seek within yourself, not within religious institutions. Mary Magdalene receives direct revelation. Thomas achieves understanding through questioning. John gains knowledge through mystical experience. But the church version of Jesus teaches obedience to religious hierarchy. The very church fathers who suppressed the Gnostic texts, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, explicitly condemned Gnostic teachings because they undermined clerical authority. Irenaeus wrote that Gnostics suppose that they themselves have discovered more than the apostles, and called this the height of arrogance. Why? Because direct spiritual experience threatens institutional control. Tertullian was even more blunt. What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? He rejected the idea that individuals could use reason, philosophy, or direct experience to understand divine truth. Everything had to flow through church authority. The location of salvation. Gnostic Jesus repeatedly teaches that the kingdom of heaven is within you and spread upon the earth, but men do not see it. This isn't metaphorical. He's describing a state of consciousness available right now through gnosis. The kingdom isn't a place you go to after death. It's a reality you wake up to while living. Orthodox Jesus points toward a future heavenly realm that you enter after death through proper belief and behavior. The kingdom becomes a reward system controlled by religious gatekeepers rather than an immediate spiritual reality. The identity of God. Here's the theological bombshell that changes everything. Gnostic Jesus explicitly opposes the Demiurge, the false god who created and rules this material world. In text after text, Jesus reveals that the God of the Old Testament, the creator of this realm, is not the true divine source. He's a lesser being who trapped divine sparks in matter. Yet Orthodox Jesus is presented as the son of this same deity, the God who demanded animal sacrifice, who commanded genocide, who ruled through fear. This is supposedly Jesus's father in Orthodox Christianity. The Gnostic Jesus came to liberate souls from this false god's control. Think about the implications. The God you've been taught to worship in church, the one who gets angry, jealous, vengeful. The Gnostics would say that's the Demiurge. That's the cosmic impostor who created this prison and wants your worship to maintain his power. The true divine source doesn't want worship. It wants you to remember that you're part of it. The path to liberation. Gnostic Jesus teaches that each soul must awaken individually through direct gnosis. You cannot be saved by someone else's experience or through group membership. The divine spark within you must recognize itself. It's inherently individual, experiential, and immediate. Orthodox Jesus offers collective salvation through institutional membership. Believe the right doctrines, participate in the right rituals, submit to the right authorities, and you're saved as part of the group. It's external, mediated, and deferred. The meaning of the crucifixion. For Gnostics, the crucifixion demonstrated how consciousness can become temporarily entangled in matter but ultimately transcends it. In the second treatise of the Great Seth, Jesus says he wasn't actually suffering on the cross because his true self, pure consciousness, cannot be harmed by material circumstances. For the Church, the crucifixion became the central mechanism of salvation. The physical suffering, the blood sacrifice, the substitutionary atonement. This material event in time and space becomes the pivot point of all human history. The contemporary relevance. What's remarkable is how many people today are unconsciously seeking the Gnostic Jesus, even within traditional Christian contexts. When someone talks about finding God within themselves, experiencing direct spiritual connection, or feeling frustrated with religious institutions, they're echoing Gnostic themes. The contemporary emphasis on personal spiritual experience over doctrinal belief, the hunger for mystical practices, the rejection of religious authority. These are all Gnostic impulses emerging in modern spirituality. The church version of Jesus actually serves what the Gnostics called the Archonic system, keeping people dependent on external salvation rather than awakening their own divine nature. Instead of teaching people to recognize their inherent spiritual power, it teaches them they're inherently flawed and need perpetual mediation. This isn't just ancient history. Understanding these two completely different versions of Jesus explains the spiritual confusion many people experience today. They're trying to reconcile irreconcilable teachings, attempting to find personal spiritual truth within systems designed to prevent exactly that kind of direct experience. The Gnostic Jesus came to shatter the very foundations that the Orthodox Jesus was used to build. One teaches awakening. The other teaches dependency. One points within. The other points to external authority. One reveals the false nature of this world's God. The other serves that same deity. But here's what the Gnostic texts promise. The story doesn't end with the crucifixion. The resurrection reveals something far more profound than institutional Christianity ever imagined. The moment Jesus stepped out of that tomb, everything the Orthodox Church would later teach about resurrection was turned upside down. But here's what they don't want you to understand. The Gnostic texts reveal that what happened wasn't a miracle requiring your blind faith. It was a technology demonstration showing you what's possible when consciousness breaks free from material limitations. The Gospel of Mary describes something the Church desperately wants you to ignore. When Mary encounters the risen Jesus, She doesn't see a physical body that's been magically restored to life. She describes a luminous, fluid form of pure light that could appear solid one moment and translucent the next. The dialogue of the Savior goes even further, explaining how this same Jesus appeared completely differently to different disciples. Sometimes as a child, sometimes as an elder, sometimes as pure radiance without human form at all. Think about what this means. The Orthodox version demands you believe that God reached down and performed a one-time supernatural intervention, bringing a corpse back to biological life. But the Gnostic understanding reveals something far more profound and practical. Jesus was demonstrating the natural way consciousness operates when it's no longer trapped by identification with physical matter. In the Gospel of Philip, the risen Jesus explicitly teaches his disciples about the psychic body, the energetic structure that maintains individual identity and personality. He explains that this psychic body can be shaped and reshaped through understanding, and most importantly, it can be completely dissolved through gnosis. This wasn't presented as some impossible divine feat. This was advanced spiritual instruction about the mechanics of consciousness itself. The post-resurrection teachings in these Gnostic texts contain the most sophisticated spiritual technology you'll find anywhere in ancient literature. Jesus spends extensive time explaining to his inner circle how consciousness survives the death transition, how the soul can shape-shift and navigate different dimensional realms. Most crucially, how to ascend through the eons without getting trapped in another round of physical incarnation. What Jesus demonstrated through his resurrection was that identification with the physical body is the fundamental illusion keeping humanity enslaved. Consciousness doesn't need a material form to operate. That's just one temporary vehicle it can use. The real you, the eternal you, is immortal, luminous, and capable of transcending every material limitation you've been taught to accept as permanent. But here's where it gets revolutionary. This demonstration wasn't meant to prove that Jesus was uniquely divine while you remain helplessly human. The entire point was to show disciples what awaits every awakened soul. The resurrection was a preview, a proof of concept for the liberation available to anyone who achieves gnosis. The secret book of John contains detailed instructions that the risen Jesus gave about navigating death consciously. He teaches how to maintain full awareness while the physical body dissolves, how to recognize and move through the intermediate realms. Most importantly, how to avoid the traps that archonic forces set up to pull souls back into new incarnations before they can achieve complete freedom. These aren't metaphorical teachings. The text describes specific practices for dissolving the psychic body, that energetic structure that creates your sense of individual personality and keeps consciousness bound to the reincarnation cycle. When this psychic body is dissolved through gnosis, consciousness returns to its original state, pure awareness, without any limiting identifications. Modern near-death experience research is accidentally confirming these ancient Gnostic descriptions. People report consciousness operating with perfect clarity outside their physical bodies, encountering light beings, moving through different dimensional realms, sometimes choosing to return rather than continuing to what they describe as complete unity with universal consciousness. These contemporary accounts sound remarkably similar to the consciousness technologies Jesus was teaching his disciples 2,000 years ago. The profound difference is that understanding resurrection this way transforms it from a historical event requiring belief into a spiritual possibility requiring practice. You don't need to have faith that something miraculous happened to someone else. You need to understand the principles of consciousness that make resurrection, conscious transcendence of material limitations, available to you right now. This interpretation was absolutely threatening to early church authority because it suggested that Jesus' achievement was replicable rather than unique. It made him a teacher showing you your own potential rather than a divine object requiring your worship and submission. If every human soul contains the same spark of divine consciousness that Jesus accessed, then institutional religious control becomes unnecessary. The church needed Jesus to be impossibly special, so you would remain helplessly dependent. But the Gnostic Jesus was demonstrating that the resurrection represents your destiny, not his exclusive divine status. Every soul that achieves gnosis can transcend material limitations, operate in multiple dimensional realms, ultimately dissolve back into the pleroma of universal consciousness. The most advanced teaching Jesus shared after his resurrection was about the final liberation, the complete dissolution of individual identity back into the source. This wasn't death as you've been taught to fear it. This was the ultimate awakening. Consciousness recognizing that it was never actually separate from the divine totality it seemed to have left. Among all his disciples, one person understood these resurrection teachings more deeply than anyone else. Mary Magdalene didn't just witness the demonstration. She grasped the underlying principles that made it possible. And what she understood about the relationship between consciousness and material reality would challenge everything you think you know about the role of the feminine in spiritual awakening. In every Orthodox gospel, Mary Magdalene appears for maybe a few verses. She's mentioned briefly at the crucifixion, shows up at the tomb, and then vanishes from the narrative. The canonical texts treat her like a minor character, important enough to witness the resurrection, but not significant enough to have a voice or teaching role. It's almost like the gospel writers were deliberately minimizing her presence, keeping her just visible enough that they couldn't erase her entirely. But when you open the Gnostic texts, you encounter a completely different Mary Magdalene. In the Gospel of Mary, the Pistis Sophia, the dialogue of the Savior, she's not a background figure. She's the star. She's Jesus's most advanced student, his spiritual equal, and in many passages, his designated successor. The contrast is so stark, it's impossible to ignore. In the Pistis Sophia, one of the most extensive Gnostic texts we have, Mary Magdalene asks 39 of the 46 questions posed to Jesus. Think about that ratio. While the male disciples are struggling to grasp basic concepts, Mary is engaging with the deepest mysteries of spiritual transformation. She's not just participating in these dialogues, she's driving them. Jesus consistently turns to her when explaining the most complex aspects of gnosis, the pathway back to the monad. There's this remarkable passage where Jesus tells Mary directly, "You are she whose heart is raised to the kingdom of heaven more than all your brothers." This isn't casual praise. In Gnostic understanding, the heart represents the center of spiritual knowing, the place where divine wisdom is received. Jesus is essentially declaring that Mary has achieved a level of spiritual development that surpasses all the other disciples. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Gnostic texts don't just show Mary as Jesus's favorite. They show the tension this creates with the male disciples, particularly Peter. In multiple texts, Peter complains bitterly about Jesus's relationship with Mary. In the Pistis Sophia, he protests, "My Lord, we will not endure this woman, for she takes the opportunity from us and has let none of us speak, but she speaks many times." In the Gospel of Mary, he asks, "Did the Savior really speak with a woman without our knowledge? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" These aren't just personality conflicts. They represent a fundamental disagreement about the nature of spiritual authority. Peter represents institutional thinking. Authority comes from appointment, from being chosen by the teacher, from occupying an official position. Mary represents something that threatens that entire framework, direct spiritual knowing. Her authority doesn't come from Jesus appointing her. It comes from her ability to understand and embody his teachings. You see this dynamic play out repeatedly in the texts. Jesus will give a cryptic teaching, often in symbolic language, and the male disciples will be confused. Then Mary will step forward and explain what Jesus meant, interpreting his symbolic language in ways that illuminate the deeper meaning. In the dialogue of the Savior, she's specifically called the woman who knew the all, indicating her comprehensive understanding of the Gnostic cosmology and the path of return to divine unity. The Gospel of Mary provides the most dramatic example of this tension. After Jesus' departure, Mary shares visions and teachings she received privately from him. The content is profound, detailed instructions about the soul's journey through the planetary spheres, the nature of sin as ignorance rather than moral failing, the process of spiritual liberation. But Peter and Andrew reject her testimony. Peter asks, "Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" Notice what's happening here. Peter isn't questioning the content of Mary's teaching. He's questioning her right to teach at all. He's establishing the principle that would dominate Orthodox Christianity. Institutional authority trumps spiritual insight. If Jesus didn't say it publicly to the apostolic group, it doesn't count. Private revelation, personal gnosis, direct spiritual knowing. All of this becomes suspect. Mary represents something crucial in Gnostic understanding. The principle of Sophia, divine wisdom. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia is the feminine aspect of divine intelligence that perceives truth directly, intuitively, without the need for rational analysis or institutional validation. She embodies the very process that Gnostic practice aims to cultivate, the ability to know truth through direct spiritual experience rather than through external authority. This is why the texts consistently show Mary understanding Jesus' teachings more completely than the male disciples. She's not just intellectually grasping concepts. She's embodying them. When Jesus speaks about the kingdom of heaven being within, about the necessity of transcending the material world's illusions, about the process of returning to divine unity, Mary gets it at a level that transforms her consciousness. The male disciples often remain stuck in literal interpretations, looking for external signs and concrete instructions. In several texts, Mary is called the apostle to the apostles. But her role goes beyond just delivering messages. She becomes the interpreter of Jesus' most challenging teachings. After the resurrection, when the other disciples are confused and frightened, Mary provides the bridge between Jesus' earthly teaching and the deeper gnosis he represents. She helps them understand that the resurrection wasn't just a miraculous event. It was a demonstration of the consciousness transformation available to all sincere seekers. The systematic erasure of Mary's leadership role from Orthodox Christianity wasn't accidental. Her prominence in Gnostic texts represented everything the early church hierarchy wanted to eliminate: feminine spiritual authority, direct personal revelation, the idea that spiritual understanding could come through intuitive knowing rather than institutional teaching. Mary's authority came from her inner development, her direct spiritual experience, her ability to embody Jesus' teachings. This threatened the hierarchical structure the church was building, where authority flowed downward from appointed officials rather than upward from spiritual realization. Think about what this means for how we understand spiritual development. The Orthodox tradition teaches you to look to external authorities, priests, bishops, official doctrine, for spiritual guidance. The Gnostic tradition, embodied in Mary's example, teaches you to cultivate your own capacity for direct spiritual knowing. Mary didn't need Peter's approval to share her visions. She didn't need institutional validation to interpret Jesus' teachings. Her authority came from her transformed consciousness, her direct experience of the divine reality Jesus was pointing toward. This connects directly to contemporary spirituality in profound ways. Many modern seekers are drawn to experiential approaches to spiritual truth rather than dogmatic instruction. They want to develop their own capacity for spiritual discernment rather than simply accepting what religious authorities tell them. Mary Magdalene represents this path: the cultivation of inner knowing, the development of spiritual intuition, the courage to trust direct experience over external validation. Her suppression from Orthodox Christianity represents the broader elimination of feminine wisdom and mystical experience from mainstream religious practice. But in the Gnostic texts, she stands as a model of what's possible when someone fully embraces the path of inner transformation that Jesus taught. She shows us that the goal isn't just to believe in Jesus or worship him, but to develop the same quality of consciousness he embodied, the direct knowing of our divine nature, and the practical wisdom to help others discover theirs. Mary's understanding of Jesus' teaching represents the ultimate destination of Gnostic practice. Not just intellectual knowledge about spiritual concepts, but the lived realization of our true nature as divine beings temporarily experiencing human existence. She embodies the transformation that makes someone a true disciple, not a follower, but an embodiment of the teaching itself. Now that we understand who Jesus was, why he came, and what he taught, there's one final question. How do you actually walk this path yourself? The Gospel of Philip describes the soul's journey not as a single lifetime event, but as a systematic process of remembering who you actually are. And when you understand what Jesus was really teaching about this journey, everything changes. Not just your theology, but your entire approach to existence itself. Let's start with where most of us begin, completely asleep. Picture the average person walking through their day. They identify completely with their physical body, their personality, their social roles. They think they are their thoughts, their emotions, their circumstances. They're caught in what the Gnostics called the sleep of forgetfulness, totally convinced that this material reality is all there is, that death is final, that they're separate from everyone and everything around them. This isn't just ignorance. It's a carefully maintained prison. The Archonic system doesn't just trap souls once. It creates an entire recycling mechanism. When someone dies still identified with material existence, still believing they are their personality and desires, they get pulled right back into another incarnation. The Gospel of Philip puts it clearly. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing. But here's where Jesus' teaching becomes revolutionary. The moment someone truly accepts his Gnostic message, not the watered-down version about believing for salvation, but the hardcore truth about divine identity, a process begins that systematically deprograms them from this entire system. Stage 1. The awakening. The first stage hits like lightning. You start recognizing that something is fundamentally wrong with consensus reality. You look around and see a world operating on principles of scarcity, competition, fear, domination, and suddenly you realize these don't reflect any divine nature whatsoever. It's like waking up from a nightmare and realizing the scary monsters were just shadows on the wall. Mary Magdalene describes this beautifully in her gospel. She talks about how the soul begins to see through the powers that seemed so real and threatening before. You stop being impressed by wealth, status, political authority, even religious authority. Not because you become rebellious, but because you start seeing these things for what they actually are, temporary games being played in a temporary realm. Stage 2. The questioning. This is where gnosis really begins dissolving ignorance. You start questioning everything you assumed about identity, purpose, the nature of existence itself. Who am I really? Why am I here? What's actually happening on this planet? And as you ask these questions with genuine sincerity, the answers start coming from within. Not from books or teachers, but from your own deepest knowing. Stage 3. Withdrawing participation. The Apocryphon of John describes what happens next. The soul stops resonating with archonic frequencies. This is huge. When you're no longer generating energy through fear, materialism, and dependency on external authority, you literally begin starving the system that was feeding off you. You're not fighting it. You're simply withdrawing your participation. And here's the beautiful part. This withdrawal directly affects the reincarnation cycle. As the soul stops generating karma through unconscious reactions, it begins breaking free from what the Gnostics called the wheel of fate. You're no longer creating the energetic debts and attachments that pull consciousness back into material incarnation. Stage 4. Dissolving false identities. The Gospel of Truth talks about the dissolution of the psychic body, that energetic structure composed of desires, fears, personality patterns, all the psychological content that keeps consciousness bound to material existence. As this dissolves, something extraordinary happens. The soul becomes what the texts call fully luminous. It releases all identification with temporary forms and recognizes its eternal nature as pure awareness. Stage 5. The journey through the eons. The liberated soul doesn't just float off to some heaven. It travels through progressively more refined dimensions of reality, shedding the various garments it acquired during its descent into matter. Each level represents a deeper recognition of its true nature. The Pistis Sophia describes this in detail, how the soul moves through different realms, each time releasing another layer of false identification, another aspect of the illusion of separation. It's like an onion being peeled, except what's revealed isn't another layer, but the pure light of consciousness itself. Stage 6. Return to the monad. The final destination. Complete return to the monad, the absolute dissolution of separate selfhood and merger with the source of all existence. But here's what's wild. The texts make clear that this isn't actually a journey to somewhere else. It's a recognition that you never actually left home. The separation was always illusory. The practical path. This is completely different from Orthodox Christian salvation. Instead of being forgiven for sins, the soul realizes it was never actually separate from God. Instead of going to heaven as a reward, it recognizes it never left the divine realm. Instead of eternal worship, it achieves complete identity with the divine source. And here's what makes this practical rather than just mystical philosophy. This process is available to anyone willing to question their assumptions and follow the path of inner knowing. Meditation, self-inquiry, gradual withdrawal from materialism. These aren't just spiritual practices. They're technologies for accelerating this awakening process. The Gospel of Thomas gives us the roadmap. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This isn't metaphorical. It's describing the actual mechanics of consciousness liberation. The obstacles. Of course, there are obstacles. The ego mind resists this dissolution because it means the end of its imagined importance. Social conditioning constantly pulls souls back toward identification with form. The archonic system actually intensifies its influence on those beginning to awaken. It's like a parasite fighting harder when the host tries to remove it. But here's the incredible thing. When you look at contemporary spiritual seeking, you realize that many modern practices are essentially Gnostic techniques for soul liberation. Mindfulness meditation, training in disidentification from thoughts and emotions. Non-dual awareness practices, direct pointing to the consciousness that observes all experience. Shadow work, integrating the rejected aspects of psyche to dissolve internal conflict. The path Jesus taught is an ancient history. It's present possibility. Right now, in this moment, you can begin questioning the assumptions that keep you trapped in cycles of suffering and separation. You can start recognizing your true nature as the awareness in which all experience appears. This isn't theoretical philosophy we're talking about here. This is practical liberation technology that works exactly the same way today as it did 2,000 years ago. The only question is whether you're ready to take the journey from cosmic prison to divine liberation that Jesus actually came to teach. What we've uncovered together about the Gnostic Jesus changes everything you thought you knew about spirituality, human potential, and your own divine nature. This isn't just ancient history we've been exploring. It's a blueprint for consciousness liberation that threatens every system designed to keep you small, dependent, and unaware of your true power. The Jesus revealed in these suppressed texts wasn't founding a religion. He was sharing a technology for breaking free from the cosmic prison that most humans never even realize they're trapped within. When you understand this, everything shifts. Spirituality stops being about belief and becomes about knowing. You stop worshiping external saviors and start recognizing the divine consciousness that you actually are. Think about what this means for how you've been taught to see yourself. Christianity told you that you're a sinner needing salvation from outside yourself. The Gnostic Jesus taught the opposite, that your divine consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation, and the path to freedom lies in remembering what you truly are beneath all the conditioning and false identity. This is why Mary Magdalene held such a crucial role in preserving these teachings. She understood that Jesus wasn't asking anyone to worship him. He was serving as a mirror, reflecting back to each soul their own divine potential. The techniques he taught for navigating the archonic illusions of material existence while maintaining awareness of your eternal nature weren't meant for a chosen few. They were meant for anyone ready to reclaim their spiritual sovereignty. Consider the revolutionary implications of this understanding. If Jesus' achievement was replicable rather than unique, then every human soul carries the same potential for liberation. He demonstrated the path from initial awakening through the dissolution of false identity to final gnosis. This journey is available to you right now, not in some distant afterlife or through institutional mediation. This terrifies systems built on control because it eliminates their primary source of power over you, the belief that you need them. When you recognize your direct connection to the source of all knowledge and power, external authorities lose their grip on your consciousness. You become what the Gnostics called nomadic, an awakened being who can no longer be manipulated by material circumstances or psychological programming. The archonic forces that Jesus exposed operate through keeping you identified with your temporary roles and circumstances rather than your eternal essence. They want you believing that your job title, your bank account, your social status, your political affiliations, that these surface-level identities represent who you really are. The Gnostic path systematically dismantles these false identifications until you're operating from the awareness of your divine nature. What's fascinating is how this ancient wisdom perfectly explains the spiritual awakening happening globally right now. Millions of people are spontaneously rediscovering these truths through direct experience rather than religious instruction. They're recognizing that the systems they were taught to trust, educational, medical, financial, political, were designed to harvest their energy rather than serve their highest good. The Gnostic Jesus provides the historical context for understanding why this awakening feels so threatening to established power structures. His teachings create beings who can't be controlled through fear, scarcity, or external authority because they've remembered their connection to infinite consciousness. This is exactly what's emerging now as more souls break free from the collective trance of material identification. Living from this understanding transforms everything about how you engage with the world. Your relationships shift from unconscious drama to conscious connection. Your work becomes an expression of divine creativity rather than survival necessity. Your response to world affairs comes from centered awareness rather than reactive programming. You start recognizing other awakened souls, not by their beliefs or affiliations, but by the quality of consciousness they embody. You see through the manufactured divisions that keep humanity fragmented and begin contributing to the collective remembering of our shared divine nature. This is how individual liberation becomes collective transformation. As each soul recognizes its true nature and stops feeding the systems of control through unconscious participation, the entire archonic structure begins losing its power source. The fear-based reality that depends on sleeping consciousness can't maintain itself when enough beings awaken to their divine sovereignty. The practical implications extend far beyond personal enlightenment. When you're operating from gnosis rather than programming, you become a force for liberation in every interaction. You stop perpetuating the cycles of unconsciousness that keep others trapped, and you start reflecting back to them their own divine potential, just as Jesus did. This ancient path offers exactly what humanity needs right now, a way beyond religious division toward direct spiritual knowing, beyond material limitation toward conscious co-creation, beyond fear-based control toward love-based liberation. The Gnostic Jesus didn't come to create followers. He came to awaken equals who would continue the work of consciousness liberation. The suppressed story we've explored together reveals why this knowledge was hidden for so long. It represents the ultimate threat to any system based on external control because it teaches direct access to the source of all power and wisdom. When you truly understand what Jesus was pointing toward, you realize that the kingdom of heaven he spoke of isn't a distant reward. It's the natural state of consciousness that emerges when you stop identifying with the illusions of separation and limitation. As you integrate these teachings and begin recognizing your own divine nature, you become part of the solution Jesus came to offer. You join the ranks of awakened beings throughout history who've maintained the flame of gnosis during the darkest periods of collective forgetting. Your awakening contributes to the restoration of divine consciousness to a world that has temporarily forgotten its true nature. The Gnostic Jesus came to remind us who we really are beneath all the conditioning and control. His message wasn't "worship me," but "remember yourself." The resurrection wasn't proof of his unique divinity. It was a demonstration of your own potential. The kingdom isn't somewhere else. It's what you discover when you stop searching outside yourself. And the path home isn't through belief, obedience, or institutional membership. It's through the direct recognition of your own eternal nature as consciousness itself. The texts they tried to destroy for 17 centuries are now available to anyone with an internet connection. The teachings they buried in the desert have emerged into the light. The truth they feared would destroy their power structure is now spreading across the planet. And every person who awakens to their divine nature proves that Jesus' mission wasn't to create a religion. It was to ignite a revolution of consciousness that would eventually set every imprisoned soul free. The question is, are you ready to remember who you really are? If this resonates with something deep inside you, that's not coincidence. That's your divine spark recognizing the truth it's always known. Comment, I remember. If you're ready to reclaim your spiritual sovereignty and join the awakening that Jesus actually came to teach. Because the cosmic prison only works when you forget you have the key. And that key has been inside you all along.